Доброго вечора усім, дорогі друзі і подруги. Рівно місяць тому тут, у цій залі, в наших друзів у Центрі міської історії, ми презентували ідею проєкту Lviv Becoming a Human Rights City. Після цього ми отримали дуже багато позитивних відгуків і відчули дуже багато підтримки. Це означає, що реалізація цього проєкту потрібна не лише команді освітнього центру справ людини у Львові, який я представляю, а набагато ширшому товариству, і це дуже надихає. Але надихає мене ще один містичний факт продовжувати всю цю історію. Справа в тому, що рівно рік тому наша команда завдяки підтримці IT-компанії TeamVoy мала можливість поїхати в навчальну мандрівку в Нідерланди, і рівно рік тому ми зустріли в Нідерландах керівника департаменту європейських та міжнародних зв'язків міської ради Утрехта Ганса Саккерса. Чому він нам сподобався? Тому що, знаєте, людина каже, що в Утрехті є проблеми з правами людини. Ми, звичайно, дивилися до нього не розуміючими очима, тому що проблеми з правами людини в Утрехті, проблеми з правами людини десь тут, у Східній Європі, це різні проблеми. Але в будь-якому разі він сказав ще одну фразу. Тому ми вирішили стати містом прав людини. І він каже, так, у нас є цей статус, але ми досі не місто прав людини. Ми щойно ним стаємо. Це було дуже важливо. Після цієї зустрічі ми поверталися в поїзді в Амстердам і говорили між собою таке, може і нам щось таке придумати, може і ми Ганса колись до себе запросимо. Потім почався конкурс від посольства Нідерландів в Україні, і ми подалися з цим проєктом. Виграли, минув рівно рік з того вечора, і сьогодні Ганс Саккерс тут. Але перш ніж його представити, я хочу подякувати. Я почав свою промову з того, що в нас вже є партнери, друзі, союзники, і це дуже надихає. І одним з наших найбільших партнерів не лише в цьому проєкті, а загалом є Львівська бізнес-школа Українського католицького університету. Ганс сьогодні буде розповідати багато про так звані цілі сталого розвитку ООН. Цілі сталого розвитку Організації Об'єднаних Націй – це такі goals, яким мають слідувати усі учасники цієї організації і досягати їх. Власне, про це розкажуть наші партнери. Я з величезним задоволенням запрошую представницю Львівської бізнес-школи Українського католицького університету пані Світлану Кириченко.
Дякую, всім вітання. Так і справді, ми в Львівській бізнес-школі УКУ кожного разу раді нагоді співпрацювати з освітнім центром справ людини у Львові, тому що ми щоразу піднімаємо дуже важливі теми і привертаємо увагу вашу до цих тем спільними зусиллями. І хочу сказати, що загалом навчання у Львівській бізнес-школі УКУ – це не лише бізнес, як отримати кращі прибутки, як розвинути своє якісь підприємство і так далі. Це в першу чергу про створення цінності для клієнта, про бізнес-етику і про права людини в тому числі. І ми зараз працюємо над великим проєктом, який допоможе українському бізнесу стати ще кращим у цьому ракурсі, на цьому шляху. І буквально кілька слів, аби запрезентувати цей проект, є зараз нам нагоду Дмитру Шернговському. Він є національним консультантом з розробки цього проекту, тож Дмитро.
Дякую. Доброго вечора, ще раз раді всіх вітати. Дякую дуже. Я лише на два такі важливі моменти тут зосереджуся. Насправді, проект розвитку цілесталого розвитку, який започаткували тут програма розвитку Організації Об'єднаних Націй і німецьке агентство ГІС, має на меті поширити взагалі інформацію і знання щодо цілесталого розвитку, про які домовилися країни ООН, які входять в тому числі наша країна, в тому числі це вже є частинка нашого законодавства, тому що президент міста підписав українську готовність слідувати цілям сталого розвитку, які роблять наш світ кращим, роблять життя тут кращим. І насправді це є дуже велике коло питань, яке стосується не тільки екологічних питань, але й в тому числі питань прав людини, в тому числі економічних питань, розвитку нашої країни і наших спільнот. Тому ці всі речі є надзвичайно з ним пов'язані. І ми безпосередньо разом з бізнес-школою зобов'язалися разом з програмою розвитку ООН зробити онлайн-курс для бізнесу. Але насправді такі онлайн-курси зараз розробляються і для державної влади, в тому числі і для громадського сектора. Тому тут не стільки презентуємо, як хочемо вас запросити до співпраці і запросити вас до того, щоб ви долучалися, не тільки слухали ці онлайн-курси, які ми даємо пізніше, але, зокрема, доповнювали їх, ділилися своїми думками. Я дуже коротенько спрезентую те, що ми маємо про власне онлайн-курс для бізнесу. Так, абсолютно аналогічно є і для громадського сектору, і для влади. Кого це дуже цікавить. Дуже прошу заходити на сторінку про ООН, в Фейсбуці і цікавитися цими моментами. Отже, насправді мені якось допомагають, але перепрошую. Так, можна зробити фулскрін, і ми тоді будемо працювати з тим. Насправді, цілі сталого розвитку, хто не знайомий з тим концептом, так, їх є 17. І вони мають допомогти власне досягнути цього сталого розвитку. Поки що план є до 2030 року, далі, надіюся, будуть ще якісь плани. Якщо ми на них подивимося, то власне Стокгольмський центр сталого розвитку, він називається Rethinking, стояння. Вони поділили їх на декілька таких груп, які стосуються загальних питань, пов'язаних з біосферою, так, питаннями, фактично, які допомагають в принципі жити і виживати. Є питання, які стосуються суспільного розвитку, і є питання, які стосуються економічного розвитку. Якраз Україна починає вступати в цю гру, в перебудову, розпочинаючи з питань економічного розвитку. Для України зараз найбільше питання, яке стоїть, це досягнути фактично статусу в тому, щоб ми забезпечили сталий економічний розвиток, в тому, щоб ми досягнули можливість заробляти, стати багатими, не крадучи, нормально заробляти, так, і відповідно змогу платити за, в числі, за дорогі іноді рішення, інвестиційні рішення. І от коли саме цікаво, коли ми запитали бізнеса, так, що для них є важливо в контексті цього сталого розвитку, ми були опитувані по Україні, побачили, що дуже багато хто сказав, от це просто слова такі от мапа, і багато хто говорив про особисту відповідальність і, власне, про розвиток свого бізнесу як такого. І коли ми запитали, а що ж вам заважає це робити вже зараз, так? І інші сказали, власне, брак знань, брак ресурсів, брак навиків. Тому, власне, виникла ідея про розпочати з цих курсів. І коли ми запитали, які ж цілі, пріоритети, ці 17 цілей, більшість говорили про промисловість, інновації, більшість говорили про освіту, більшість говорили про власну можливість заробляти, так, і таким чином досягати певного рівня незалежності і самостійності. Так? І це ці всі речі, які ми хочемо відобразити в цьому курсі. Ми будемо в ньому дуже чітко зосереджуватися, хто є з представників бізнесу, підприємців, будемо чітко зосереджуватися, навіщо і як зробити бізнес сталим, не тільки витрачати, так, але заробляти на цьому. Це буде також цікаво дуже експортерам, зокрема, так, вийти на однакову мову говоріння з іноземними інвесторами, так, і з потенційними клієнтами. І в тому числі це буде цікаво, знову ж таки, в контексті надавання певних послуг, особливо іноземцям, коли ви колаборуєте з ними. І найбільше питання для нас, власне, оця от співпраця, так, і співучасть, і спільна відповідальність громадського сектору, бізнесу і влади. Тому, власне, ПРООН ініціювало 3 такі онлайн-курси, 3 онлайн-платформи, які будуть зараз розгортатися. І закінчуючи вже фактично коротенько цю презентацію, власне, хочу звернути увагу вашу на слова митрополита Андрія Шептицького, який ще 100 років тому сказав фразу, яка, я думаю, є актуальною до сих пір. Перша причина трудності в Україні, що ми говоримо, не організованість. Тож давайте разом організовувати наші спільні зусилля, і бізнес, і влада, і громадський сектор, і робити нашу країну кращу, наші міста кращі, і розуміти, що це є наша спільна відповідальність, наскільки ми можемо це зробити. Тому, кого цікавить, власне, бізнес-сектор, поділитися тут своїми думками, будь ласка, робіть скан QR-коду, ви знайдете таку анкету, я трішки довго, нам дуже важливі, власне, ваші думки до того, як краще ми можемо підготувати цей тренінговий курс, як краще ми можемо згорнути наші платформи для того, щоб максимально відповісти на всі ваші запитання. Я не буду більше забирати вашого часу. Я вам дякую за увагу. І насправді, от ми встигли з Гансом перемовитися декількома словами. Це не тільки, скажімо так, актуальне для нас, це абсолютно актуальне для всіх. І, власне, місто справ людини, в тому числі починається з поняття сталого міста. Отож, дякую вам ще раз. І I don't want to waste your time, so I'll just give you a floor. Yeah, if I may. So, thank you. Дякую.
Yes. It's funny, I have something in my bag that is relevant for tonight, but somewhere in the evening I will explain what, or I will give it as a little present to one of you. I was coming having in mind that I would focus totally on human rights, but now by the introduction I will try to combine the two bigger frames we have internationally, human rights and SDGs, global goals, the 2030 agenda, and how to, because I also don't know exactly how to do, but we all have this to find out a mixture between two very inspiring things. Well, my name is Sakkers, I'm from Utrecht. I'm here, I'm a civil servant, so I work for the municipality, but I'm here more as a member of our local coalition for human rights. And we have two coalitions with more or less 150 organizations, one for the human rights platform and one for SDGs. There are two different communities until now, but we try to mingle them, to make them one bigger movement of internationally inspired little enterprises, NGOs, citizen initiatives, and the municipality is one of them. And we were in the Utrecht situation a starting point, but Utrecht is a middle-sized city. There are four bigger cities in the Netherlands, and Amsterdam. Amsterdam is also not big. It's also an international, smaller city. Rotterdam, The Hague, Utrecht, and these four cities work a lot together. And we have in the Netherlands, when you talk about human rights, in the Netherlands, human rights is something that is not very much accepted. Because when you ask Dutch people human rights, then they say, well, that's something for Congo, or Colombia, or Cambodia, or China, all these countries with a C or a K, far away. And we have in our Ministry for Foreign Affairs, we have 60 people working on national level. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs deals with human rights over there. And in the Ministry for Interior Affairs, there are 2 people working in the Netherlands on human rights in the Netherlands. And they have a lot of work to do and a lot of pressure, because every country has to make at least all these reports for the United Nations every 5 years and so on. And there is no one working in the ministry on local human rights or the localization of these things. On SDGs, there is one coordinator in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also there you see, to make it a national thing, that we work on it in the Netherlands, in cities, in regions, it's a big problem. So the history of using international frameworks, charters, conventions, the narrative in itself, the ideology is, we talk since 5 years. There was a book of a professor where she was started to talk about the homecoming of human rights. And that is something that is very symbolic, that is very young and very new for us. and therefore I'm so happy to be here that you also, I also have the feeling that we're just starting. I will share with you a story of 10 years, but 10 years in this kind of mindset is very short. So, what I will tell you is not that I will tell you that this could be a way for you to start using this kind of things, but there are some structural questions we have to answer when we are on local level dealing with international quality standards or quality goals. So I'm very happy that I can tell you something that is telling more about my situation, and I'll also try to reflect a little bit on what we didn't manage to do and what is difficult in our situation and what we were not. And there's also a story that we have in every city a very specific ecosystem. And here you see tonight is a wonderful initiative from your side and your group and with the group, and the combination with university. And you see in many cities that we have that universities playing a crucial role, a key role to play, because the understanding of this international concept is quite a challenge to understand what is in all these charters and conventions and papers and documents and agreements and decisions and resolutions, how to use them in a meaningful way and to make them let us do something that we would not do without them. So do they really make a difference? Instead of what you see in SDG world a lot, that cities are just ticking boxes and doing reframing existing policies, especially by municipalities. They do a lot of things and then they say, well, we're already doing a lot of SDG work because we already have a policy on gender equality. So now that is done. So we do our best. And that, of course, will not help anything to transform by local initiatives the world that we need to try to create in the vision of 2030 or 2040. So this, well, I had two stories. One is about how did we became in a process of becoming a human rights city, and the second was, and that ends as a coincidence with some slide about the SDGs as a new challenge for an upcoming challenge for human rights cities, and then I made a little presentation about the meaning of human rights for business. And to see where is the connection, because there is worldwide, there are some charters and groups and platforms also at the United Nations that work on that. And there is, in the United Nations, something like the Ruggie principles, that is especially for business and tell the story, what should business do to. So I try to show a little bit where is this about and what you could take as an inspiration. But the SDGs are in the middle of this, so that's it's also a puzzle for me, but I try to explain my puzzle, how to present that. You see here the similarity. This is the city center with houses from the Middle Ages, and this kind of house is a little bit different. You also find in Lviv, so we have this old the old cities with big universities, a lot of students. You also have the big tower here. We also have a tower. So, and yeah, that's what before I start to say, because the national situation, that it's not a big thing to from the national level to promote human rights or SDGs. There is no big funding, there is no big policy, there is no mainstreaming of policies. There is so when you start in the Netherlands in human rights city, you do it on your own. There is no help, and there are no other cities that know that you can do you have sparring partners with. That means that there is the only way to learn from each other is internationally or European. So we need each other, and the experience we have to share it with the few cities in Europe, and perhaps there are 10 or 15 active. SDG is now a little bit more, but most of them are not very interesting because most of them only making a report on a monitoring system and not changing policies inspired by SDGs. So that means that we need in Europe interurban network of how do we do this? What is the way we do it together in cities? How to involve business? How to involve NGOs? What could be a role of a municipality that is necessary to facilitate? How to tell the story about human rights? What kind of examples do you use? What is the role of the university in telling the story and explaining? We have now a meeting with people from education on lower education, higher education in January, how to make it a thematic. Can we create a thematic year next year that we put in all the curriculum, in all the schools at the university, but also with the little children, that they get to know about what could be the meaning of human rights for you and the activities you're doing. But this, after 10 years, we're now on this stage that we start to think in this kind of way. But so when you have here this kind of curriculum in your university, it's also very inspiring for us to have that in mind, that it's also part of a bigger European process. Yeah, exactly. So you should take much more time tonight. So what should I do? Is this more or less what you expected, or should I do something else? But you can also say, well, we use you as a jukebox, and we have just too much questions and tell us about the questions, but otherwise I'm gonna do what I just suggested to do. Or you want, if I go on and then you say, well, this is totally in the wrong direction, we don't have anything, so correct me. So give me feedback that I should go in another direction, then oh, this was the wrong button. Oh yeah, this was the first image about what is now. This is a website. I made it, I tried to translate in your language, and what you see here, this is a platform of these 100 organizations facilitated by the municipality. And you see organizations, so behind this is the presentation of all these organizations that present themselves as one of the organizations on children, privacy policy, activists, groups of disabled people, etc. There's a lot of very diverse platform of all kinds of initiatives. And you see an agenda, what's coming up. So all these organizations also put under this umbrella their specific activity. You see some reports about what happened. It's a kind of sharing what's going on in the city, and then and this is now ongoing, and one of the things that is facilitating the network. Wrong again. Oh, I'm going in the wrong direction. Oh, Yeah, so this is, you see, this is also an old town, and there are new buildings, and on the left is the new music hall, and Utrecht is one of the fastest growing places in the Netherlands, so it's doubling size in 30 years. But the name Utrecht is also the name of the region, of the province, and the university, so it's quite consistent. You don't have in Utrecht the difficulty that you have all kind of different agglomerations with a different name, and it's quite easy to understand. You have a core city, an agglomeration, a metropolitan area, and region, and that's it. And Amsterdam is on the left upper corner, 30 kilometers away, 25 minutes by train. And the airport is a little bit on the left, also 25 minutes. So it's very in the middle of the Netherlands. The railway is also in the middle of the country. Is the big, huge railway station that connects to the rest of the country and Germany. And when we start thinking about human rights, this is a kind of how people think in the city. What kind of middle-sized little? It started as a provincial center, so it was in the 50s not a big city or the capital or whatever. It was a provincial town. And it's still what it is. But in the meantime, it became also part of the 4 big cities. So we started to lobby together for national policies together with The Hague and Amsterdam, Rotterdam. That gave since the late 70s a new kind of dynamic. It became also we started to do European funded projects. So we became partner in all kinds of projects in the beginning about monuments and archaeology and the Dome Tower restoration and exchanging how to do that for tourists, and that's it. All these things started having a European dimension. And now we think by starting to become human rights city, it was also the same moment that we became aware that we part of a much bigger world with a much bigger idea that we should relate to, like human rights and United Nations thing that went beyond Europe. So we became partner in the World Health Organization for healthy cities, and this, what we're now talking about, is also an expression of trying to become part of a bigger world. What did I do? As a civil servant, I had a phone call in 2009 from someone working at the Fundamental Rights Agency, that is an agency of the European Commission. And they are based in Vienna, and they're doing in Europe the research in the member states, in the 28 countries. They are responsible for doing research on human rights. And in that period they had a project in 6 countries, in 6 cities, and with 6 NGOs, with the question, can we work together on how we can help each other on national level, local level, and from NGOs like Amnesty International to make more out of human rights. And we see a specific role for the cities. And they called me, and I say, I never heard about it, but I will think about it. I talked with our mayor, and he was a lawyer and a mediator, and he was interested. And so we say, let's start. And we didn't know anything. We had some experience in the field of refugees, and but there was no one in the municipality working on this kind of issues in a general way. So we had to start from the beginning. And what we did was organizing a big dinner with a lot of experts. I think 80 people were there, were from university, the national people, the minister for justice. And we asked them, do you think, because there was no other city working on this, so we didn't know if this was an interesting concept and how to do that. So we asked them, do you think it would be a good idea to do this as a city? What do you think that could be an interesting way? And but they say yes. Don't ask us every month to come here, but we would be very interested to see what's happening. Then we started to think about, is there a kind of support network? What is the relevance in our city would be interested? Is there could we start a cooperation with someone outside the municipality? Because otherwise it's an internal administrative bureaucracy thing, but that is not helping the rest of the city. And then we started to talk, and then so many organizations came up that would be interested to relate their work on disabled people, on LGBTI, on social entrepreneurship, and so on. They all say, well, we want to explore, we want to perhaps become part of this movement. And we also did use this idea of dinners and a very light form of conferences, and well, and then we did some surveys. So we start to ask the population, what is your knowledge about human rights? What is do you think it's important? Do you think that's important that the municipality is supporting this? Do you know where to go when you want to claim your human rights? Did you do that? That kind of questions. Just very descriptive observations. Is this something that is alive in the city? And when we talk about SDGs, it was the number of people that could call or could mention at least 3 human rights was around 95%. So there is in the back of people's minds a very positive connotation and knowledge in our city with human rights. And they all say, well, this is of course something the municipality should work on, because there's no question at all for 95%. But you have to understand that we have, of course, 70 years of human rights education, and perhaps not education, but it's all around, all the time in one or another, and we have many charters and many conventions and etc. So and we talk about SDGs, it's only 4 years old. So it's much younger. But the awareness and the knowledge about SDGs is the biggest problem, in my opinion. But we'll come to that later. So we conclude after 1.5 years, 2 years. We also did some training together with Amnesty International for civil servants to tell them what they should know at the minimum level. And then you see there is a big awareness in the population, but there is not very much expertise on what it really says, this human rights. And that is still the same, that you have experts on human rights law, but there is no good translation from human rights into what is that really make it meaningful for changing local policies. So it's a blur of in between the international law and what to take exactly that it really should be applied on local level. And the same is, I think, also perhaps a little bit less, but for business. So there is still a lot of work to do in translating, and there are 2 principles, 2 kind of words. There's one of implementation, and that is the strict version of how to work on human rights. Just do what we say that is agreed on international level. Then local communities are instrumental in the how the strategy people from the United Nations sometimes think, and the same you see the implementation of the SDGs, so that they are be realized and that we can that local and the world is delivering on what they decided on, and that will not. I don't think it will not work, because we locally also have to engage in that. We really believe that there is an inspiration that we work on together and find our own way. So there is a creative process necessary in every day again in designing new activities, new business, new policies, and all the things we do together. This was the start. This was more or less what I was telling. So we used also European the week of local democracy. That was a thematic week. That was very helpful. That we could tell the story locally. We as Utrecht are part of the local week of democracy of the Council of Europe, and that because when you have to create it all yourself, everyone would ask in the end, yeah, why should we? Is this your personal hobby? And the whole issue of human rights has something that we need a higher level question to that say, well, this is really important. But when it's not there, and when a minister or the president of a country is not telling that story, then if we want to work, we have to relate to a higher level. Well, that happened in Utrecht. Oh yeah, this is what we also did in this European project. And this is for us was a very important moment, because this was an assessment, an evaluation of the local policies in 10 different policy areas of the municipality. Of course, all these things are always done together with a lot of civic society partners, but it was what we did was making a description of what we're doing now. Then we try to find all the relevant international law and human rights law in the second page, and then the third part was one page of evaluation. Is it good enough what we do? What is the situation in our city in cooperation with all these local partners? Is it human rights proof? And this evaluation was 10 times, and we sent it to the city council. But more interesting is how to find these 10 topics, because you can find 100 others. And this was one of the puzzle. Every starting human rights city and every time again is because this is telling the story where it's about. And this is telling from what are the examples when you say, yeah, well, human rights, this is very, but what are you talking about? No, then you have to say, well, and this selection was for us, there was one criterion. We don't want to focus only on the topics that are interesting for one political party. So in our case, we wanted to have topics that were on the agenda of left-wing parties and right-wing parties, because we say, well, human rights should have a kind of neutrality that is always relevant, always everywhere for everybody, and it should not be politicized. This is tricky, because of course it's a political thing to claim human rights in a politicized context. Of course, you have to protect citizen rights against extremists, and when you have a lot of extremists, it will be politicized. But in our case, we were lucky that we don't have that many extremists in our city council. We don't have fascists in it. We don't have, and so we had the luck the last 10 years that human rights were not discussed by any political party, although there are a lot of differences between these parties. But it was also not a leftish hobby. So you see a lot of examples in Europe that you have a very progressive mayor, and he or she start the project with human rights because of telling their own story in a different way. That is, when there is a next mayor coming, then it's gone. So, and we try to tell the story all the time. Well, this should be very slowly, but it should be in the mind of everyone all the time. We don't make a war with it in the beginning, but there will be moments that will be very symbolic for that we say that we have a point of moral reference, that we say here is you cannot go on. And that moment also came. But it is also that it's in the contract of the city council, it was not mentioned the first 10 years until last year. For the first time, the political parties start to write down, we want to become, they never did before, although it was already used all the time as a point of reference. The first time they wrote down, we are standing up for being a human rights city. So it took 10 years to have some kind of declaration, and even not in decision by the city council. So, and I always try to avoid that we put it in to try to get a decision, because then you could also have the risk that it was used to make a statement against the sitting local government. So I didn't, in my case, I didn't, I was thinking all the time we need a strategy that takes very long, and that we want to work on sustainability of the concept, because we cannot let someone throw it away. So perhaps I was too carefully and too... But something happened, because in the first 2 years I tried to keep it very silent and to make it a kind of sneaky strategy. But then there was, because when you want to become as a state, United Nations A status, you need a National Institute for Human Rights, and we didn't have one. So in the end, the Dutch government also decided, well, we don't want to get rid of our A status, so they agreed on we have a National Institute for Human Rights. And it was open, it's based in Utrecht, and there were 100 people working, doing all the research in the Netherlands on human rights violations and discrimination and so on. And it was opened in the big venue on the with 1,000 people, and the Queen was there, and Mrs. Pillay was the High Commissioner for Human Rights in 2012, and she was there, and she came to open the Dutch Institute, and she said, well, nice to be here in Utrecht, and the first human rights city in the Netherlands. I like it. I don't, oh my God. Then, of course, this was not an official title, because there is no official title. There is no procedure that leads to become a human rights city. So, but it was because the symbolic value of that suddenly it was around, and people start to, and because there are two kinds of cities like Barcelona say, well, you also have to do marketing with this concept, because when you tell the story, it's of course an asset for a city that business like it, because it's you have transparent governance, and it tell the story you're not corrupt, and so on. So it's good. And when something is not okay, not good enough, people will tell you you should improve because you're a human rights city, so do something. So you have an open discourse. And this is one side, and I think I was perhaps also a person too afraid to take that position, but we had to change because of Mrs. Pillay. So it became much more open. Well, there is in that period also was a toolkit made by the European Union. It's still on the website of the FRA. It's called, when you look on Google on Joined Up Governance, you still find it. It's great. It's never used because this kind of institutions, we produced it together with a lot of tips and questions and examples. But then a project stops, and actually you should start to use it in trading situations. And but it's still very cool material. So I think that we coming now in a phase that the FRA starts now again on working on cities, because they stopped working on cities in 2013, 14. But now they are on board again, and next week there will be the first meeting organized by the Fundamental Rights Agency in Brussels with a lot of experts and some cities, also beginning cities like Gdansk and Bordeaux they invited. But I think that it could be a circle that's also very interesting for Lviv to be connected to. Yeah, what we also did is Barbara Omen is one of the human rights sociologists and law professors, and together with her I wrote an application for doing research on what can we learn from other cities in Europe. So we had a lot of students traveling all over Europe, coming back with impressions, and we had learning sessions, and the postdoc that was working for her was also in my office having a desk, and that was a very interesting period from 2012, 2014 to have this integration of research in the municipality and exploring how we could work also with the city and to find new ways of telling the story mainly. This was also the period that we start to tell the story outside, because we say, well, this 95% perhaps have some idea about human rights, but we have to be more explicit. We have to tell because without the municipality, the municipality is important to tell in public space in a neutral way. You should expect that from municipality to do that in a neutral way and not in a political interested way. Tell stories about that is an important story. So translating the international human rights story into the local. This is where you get your passport in the former building, and this was an exposition about LGBTI rights, and this was one example. We had a cultural I come back. We have this LGBTI zebras in the city center. The university start to. Well, this was one of the. This is a definition of a human rights city, and you see that what is happening here. This is very much in the policy implementation language, and that was where we started as becoming human rights cities, about entities, government, policies, treaties, local. This it sounds everything very formal, and what we try to create, say, well, when we go on with this administrative bureaucracy thing, it will never become a local movement. So we have to, and then we switch the terminology into we want to create a local human rights culture. So we start to use the word culture as a kind of imaginary, and to say there's a book of Samuel Moyne about human rights, the last utopian, and we say, well, this is not only a legal system which helps us to take some things into court to make it a juridical thing, to tell, well, this and this and this is happening, but it's forbidden. That should change something. Into it's an inspiration to design new policies, new programs, new projects. and there's a very different way of thinking. So it became ambivalent concept of one side, juridical one, and the other side we started to think about how to use it in a creative way and to start things. And this ambiguity was in our thinking on that moment that we were not happy enough with. We did a court case in 2014 and we won that in Strasbourg. And what we did was that we took the national government that was forbidding us to take care, to give shelter to undocumented asylum seekers. Because refugees was in the procedure and not allowed to stay. So they should go back to their countries they came from. And we said as a city, well, people are there, and of course, perhaps you took the decision that they should go back, but people should not live on the street. And as a city, we have the responsibility to take care about human dignity. And this is going one step too far in telling us as a local entity that we cannot take care. So we said, and this international human rights law is forbidding us not to take care. So you're not right. And the right-wing government, national, of course didn't like us, but we went to Strasbourg, the European Court for Socio-Economic Court. And we won the case, and so you see in this triangle of when you only have to deal with the national and the local, you always lose, because they have the money, and they give you money, they can cut the money, they can do what they want in this bilateral system. If you have Europe, you have an escape, and there is another party that's a little bit bigger than the national government, and the national government is also relating to them. So there are examples, of course, that I don't want to say that mayors always and city council or local communities are better than national levels, because also a lot of mayors elected by an anti-human rights program. And sometimes Europe is also hurting, violating human rights law a lot. We know the examples. So we need this triangle at least to correct, that we bottom up tell other stories than nationally and internationally. That's also important to work together to tell these stories together, because only one city is just a little city. But when cities like Rome, Madrid, Barcelona, Vienna tell the story together, so we stand up for human dignity and want to have organized what we are responsible for by global moral values, then yeah, what we did here is that we had all these organizations, but some of them were very, you see them very well in the public space. For example, Sint Maarten is a very old Catholic organization that has a huge revival in the beginning of November. Thousands of children carrying lights in the evening, and they are representing the local tradition of taking care of the other. And this is a very important movement that is very big, religious oriented, inspired, but making the bridge to human rights to say, well, we want to become part of this bigger movement of an international standard. This is there's also a movie, but this is we could see when there is internet later, perhaps about all kind of cities we invited to work together, to exchange. And you see here all kind of interviews of people from other cities telling why they think that we should cooperate. This is Sint Maarten. Well, it's much bigger now, this horse. And it's a story that he cut his cape in two parts and gave the one to the poor guy. This is the Indian community of Gandhi. So the Gandhi Walk was also a symbol of an international group of people living in Utrecht, wanted to become related. And you see also that it's very much business related, because the people organizing this wants to invite Indian tourists to Utrecht. They have tourism business, and they created an image of Utrecht because they also made a Gandhi statue, like in Tavistock Square in London. You have one, and there are some others. But they also give the city in very nice big sculpture of Gandhi is now in front of the university, and they use this for telling the story for Indian tourists to come to Utrecht because this is a Gandhi minded city, and this is also fits in the storytelling about it's also a human rights city because of Gandhi. It's not true, but it's just storytelling and how to sell this kind of thing. This is in a cultural program, the Peace Treaty of Utrecht, one of the first peace treaties that was negotiated in Europe and without fighting in 1713. It was held in the conference for more than 1 year. Conferences held in Utrecht City Hall, and inspired by this peace treaty, this was an exposition about peace and human rights in the public space. And the same year we gave it to Sarajevo at the opening of the remembering the start of the First World War. So it was very nice at the canal. The same story was in other parts of Europe. This is a big discussion for human rights in the Netherlands. It's about post-colonial discussion that has to do with the Dutch believing that they don't need human rights. But this is an art project, and there is something like Sinterklaas. There's an holy guy coming from by boat by Spain, and this kind of guys are his servants, and they have in the classical way these golden earrings, black faces, big red lips. So the Afro-American communities are very much against it, and using also the local human rights movement to tell the story that this is not done anymore. That you cannot present that white people do blackfacing. In America, it's not done already for a very long time, but in the Netherlands, it is still happening. And there is now more and more two groups of people fighting, or really attacking each other. In that the real Dutch want to protect the right on having the real Black Pete, and this is very sensitive on this moment. But it's also discourse in human rights. This is a kind of cafe we're organizing very regularly, almost every month. That is places like here. People from all these organizations can pitch the projects they're doing, and other organizations can jump in or offer help or show up or whatever. This is kind of matchmaking. And well, you see, it has some lines and it goes on, but it doesn't go on that much in the municipality. It's mainly in society, on the streets, in the university. But what happened is that there are some examples that it start to work as a point of reference in the city council. And there were 3 decisions that was explicitly say, well, we want to become a children's rights city because we are a human rights city. We want to become a shelter city, so offering for 3 months a safe place for human rights activists from somewhere of the world to come and to stay and then go back. And the idea of healthy urban living, just health as an issue of equality, because there are parts of the city that people have a life expectancy of in good health without chronic disease of 17 years less than average. So this became suddenly 3 years ago a huge human rights issue of equality, that we became aware that there is such a big difference between different neighborhoods and districts when you compare them on health issues, and health includes all these other indicators of poverty, access to, etc., stress, and so on. We had some projects on new kind of refugee, EU funded also, that we really start to design refugee projects starting by human rights. Plan Einstein, but it's a story in itself. And this is the shelter city. We have an annual meeting on the 10th of December that we invite the whole network for dinner, and looking back for the year and looking forward to the coming year. And there's always a combination of food, music, theater, speeches, little discussions, round tables. So we take them, we start at 5. We have now a kind of standard program that we start at 5 on Thursday evening and ending with music and dancing at 10. So we take 5 hours and then we have this program. And, this is a picture of becoming a children's rights city, and there is a focus giving a voice to children. Because one of the ideas is that when a city is good for children and children can co-design new plans, it's also good for adults. So children as something as a key point of reference became with becoming children's rights city also a point of reference for. There's also a network of children's rights city, but it's then we have this. I put Lviv in the middle, but this is a list of cities I remember that were part of this European network of cities working on human rights in an explicit way, because many cities do something, but they don't call it human rights. And my opinion is that there is a real difference between having social policies and but when you don't call it human rights, it's something else. Then there is not on the background this law that could be used to say, well, this is really not done. And when you're only talking about resilience or social inclusion, it's nice, but it's not the same. And that is something to have in mind. What do you really want to communicate if you, in the words you're using? Because, and when you're not using the word, you cannot make it a movement. Then it will be a movement of resilience or whatever. And people will not know about human rights. They will know about something else. So we choose about, well, it's really important to use the word human rights because that is what it is, and it's not something else. You see that a lot of cities come and then go again, because when I would guess, we have all the period of the last 10 years I was active in this network or have had contact, or more or less 10 cities that really worked on it and show up in international. And many cities had a mayor, and then the mayor gone, and then it was over. So you really need a broad spectrum of local partners in business, in NGOs, in activist groups, in the municipality to have continuity. And it cannot be an action of one person. It can start, it always starts with one person. But if it stay like that, it's there will be a moment after 4 years or 8 years that the person is tired or burned out or went to another city, and then it's that's not good enough. I'm talking too much, or what? Yeah, I can make the link to SDGs. Because one of the things happened in 2015 was that we worked as municipality and also with a lot of partners in the same kind of way on the Millennium Goals. So from 2000 till 2015 we had a lot of programs in Nicaragua and different parts of the world, but mainly in Nicaragua and in Utrecht on awareness, but it was very focused on how to work together with a third world country. We did an evaluation and we were inspired by the SDGs and given a new advice to the city council that we say, well, we want to become a global goal city. We call it global goal city, and as the main title and making these SDGs concrete. There was discussion in the city council that the more liberal political parties wanted to have the economic SDGs on the forefront, and the left parties wanted the poverty and the education SDGs in the middle. And well, we decided, well, we work on SDG 11 in the beginning, but of course we work on all the issues. The same thing happened more or less, that we had some hesitant reaction from the civil servants, because they say, like with human rights, we already have a strategy. The politicians are totally, and the mayors, they are very much in favor. The city council, they have 17 ambassadors. They all adapted one of the goals, and they always talking about in the city also having this SDG in mind and making reference. The civil servants and the directors are different story, because you have all kinds of policies. And to say, and there are some cities that are doing that, like Malmö and Bristol, and they making the step that they say, well, we take the 17 goals and we have 17 chapters and we have 17 budgets and we reorganize the whole thing. What are our goals related to the SDGs, and this is our organization. That some do that, but in our case that will never happen. So we did the same, that we start to work on SDGs in society and to let them tell the story. But we did a lot of promotion in telling the story that this is important. And you see there is an example of in Liverpool, it's called the Hub 2030, is a business initiative. And what you see there, because of course there's a group of business people very enthusiastic, starting to tell the story about their company and what they do on SDGs, and also be inspired by SDGs and thinking about the products and so on. But in the end, when the clients don't know SDGs, you cannot make a reference to it. Then people say, what are you talking about? So you cannot do marketing or any kind of storytelling when only 1% of the population knows what SDG means. So we did also surveys that we, after a lot of campaigning, you can show a few examples what we did, that we say we want this city to be an SDG city, and we invite all kind of, we're coming to, well, it depends a little bit how you ask it, but when you ask, do you know what the SDG, what the SDGs really are and what it means, we come to 35%. But when you compare it with human rights, this 95%, it's a lot more. So, and my opinion is that we really need 25-30% of knowledge in the population that really recognize and acknowledge that the SDGs is a thing that is of value, is important. You cannot start as a company to use the narrative in expressing yourself. You cannot put a label out of your door or the front of your shop and say, well, I'm SDG, when you come in here, this is SDG 8. Well, nobody will understand. So that will not happen. So it's also, but when you start to do that, it helps a lot in creating numbers. So when you above this 30% and that you're not fooling, make a fool out of yourself, then suddenly it can work and that you can go by all this little kind of marketing a lot more people. So you go with the help of business to 40%. And then you need the education system and that students telling the story at home, and then you're going to 50%. So you need this kind of circles to sweeping up to make the dynamic of going above the too low levels. So Liverpool is not working because the municipality is not helping in the beginning to tell the story. So I think that, like in human rights, SDGs only works when you have a bigger movement, but without the municipality, it's you have missing an essential partner. This is more or less what we did in because we also tried the same thing we learned from human rights. We try to do in SDGs, and this is localizing in a way that we took the international narrative, the symbolic, and so you see in the left, the green box is our 18th SDG, and we call it the kind of the main story why we are doing this, and that is because of healthy urban living. So health is in the heart of all these policies. So we say we have this emotional reference that we don't want, that we think is not good, that some districts are dying 8 years earlier than other districts. This is a kind of inequality that is not acceptable. And that is a moral issue that is supported by human rights. So you see this, the integration of the story behind this green box is a human rights inspired value. Then we say, well, it was not very welcomed by the UN, but we created the colored ring as a U of Utrecht. So we say we have to the freedom to use it in our way. It's not, we don't only implementing what you tell us, we have the creative responsibility to make it our own, something from us. And we made the number 11 is about sustainable cities with our Domtoren tower and one of the city buildings. So to also to create ownership, and this is what we using. But this is also the story about from implementation discourse into that it's a local imaginary, that it should be a meaningful inspiration, because when it's not the SDGs, it's just an implementation tool and a policy frame, then a group of people will not be inspired by it, that they say, well, let's start thinking about something new. And without inspiration, it will not change the world. So I don't know if this is working, because it's still a bureaucracy interpretation of localization. So we try to do our best to bring it into the city, to say, well, this is our thing. But it only works, it's only true when you see that people take over. What happened there is now a fight between some institutions to become the SDG house or the ESG hub in the city, and that is there is the hub for entrepreneurs. Is a big building with 150 social enterprises, startups. So they want to claim it that they are the SDG hub for the home for the city. And they want to use the colors to redesign the the outside of the building. But the library also want to do that. And there are some others that also say, well, but we are the center of this local initiative, so, and then it becomes a little bit crowded. As a municipality, we don't say, well, we're giving subsidy to one of you, and we cannot say, well, stop that, because, but it's something to moderate that it's that there is no competition between institutions that is creating fuss or hierarchies in things. Yeah, what? Oh, this is something else. Well, this is about a project, but it's perhaps for later. This is a movie about the last. Do you think that could be interesting to see a movie later on? Is this the same, or is it? Yeah, for yesterday. Yeah. Well, this is business. Human rights and business. About business. We didn't work that much in on human rights and business. So what we did was always in the perspective of SDGs. And when you ask me to say something about human rights and business, it's just the beginning of thinking how could we, because what we do with SDGs is we do a lot of workshops with companies and have them on the table. It's organized by the economic board, and they have always a startup with 17 numbers on the floor and ask people take one number and the topic behind it to tell the story that you want to work on. What is the thing that you have in mind that could be your contribution to a better world, to a more interesting city, and take the number. Then you always have, of course, people want to take the same number, and with the SDGs that's not a problem, because you always can tell your story by another number, because they're very related to each other. So we, and when we work on human rights, it's mainly in the question, what is your contribution on poverty, on gender equality, on education, on sustainable circular production, on open governance, on cooperation, the questions inside the SDGs. When I start thinking about I think, well, we didn't, this information or material, we didn't try out yet, but it's, I think, some elements that could be used very well in these workshops from the entry of the SDGs. So the roles we have, so the NGOs are not on this list, but we also could put them in a different, and also the role of universities could be defined by roles and responsibilities. And I think that when I had to look in all the international things that were said about human rights and business and entrepreneurship, it's this kind of responsibility is somewhat very key. Responsibility for the chain, for the products, for the employment, the people that are working for you, the access to your products, and also all kind of related things when you have, for example, security for protecting your business or your products, also respecting the way they are acting as guards and so on. This is the city hall, and this is the planet. And we did. We had it for 4 weeks. This is the busiest place in Utrecht. It's on the central station, and it's a combination of telling the stories or the story about SDGs and getting business on board. This was the first time this thing, this climate planet. It's huge. It's 35 meters from one side to the other, and around it you have boxes. So when you can go in, you see a movie about climate change. You will be, after 45 minutes, you'll be totally depressed and coming out. And then you have the SDGs, and inside the SDGs there are all kind of workshops by local groups and entrepreneurs that offering you a way out in how to go on, because how to transform after knowing what is happening with the world. We did inside the globe many business meetings and for awareness raising, but also training and how to reformulate the things we are doing together. It was sponsored. This thing is too expensive for the municipality. It costs for 4 weeks 600,000 euros, and we did it for the first time by crowdfunding. So we organized that companies also could pay a part of the whole process, because it also has to be in the night be overseen by people. It has to need energy. It needs a lot of things cost. Beside it, it has to be brought and transported and built. And that was for the first time that it more or less was could be paid also by businesses and organizations taking responsibility that this is something we want to have in our city. This is something we want to pay for and of course they could use the space also to do workshops and to without rent. And we had 20,000 visitors in 1 month and 4,000 children, and because this is the busiest train station in the Netherlands, we had 500,000 people that saw this thing. So it was a huge boost to tell the story that SDGs and making it local came together. Yeah, well, there are, when you see the literature on SDGs and business, I think these three are mentioned most. There are others, of course, indirect, but inclusive economic growth, employment, decent work is a very strong one that is in the SDGs. Sustainable consumption and production, becoming a circular economy, and also the responsibility worldwide in when you are dealing with the rest of the world in your business. This was one of the main ideas I think that I'm getting from international literature is for business the most powerful contribution to sustainable development is to embed respect for human rights across their value chain. And business respect for human rights is not a choice, it's a responsibility. And well, this isn't kind of ritual, but this is something that is perhaps very essential to build on. And this was also for me quite inspiring. To put it simply, achieving the SDGs will require that states meet their duty to protect human rights from business-related human rights abuses, and that businesses meet their corporate responsibility to respect human rights. So there is a double and bounded interconnection that we need each other to, like what I say about local, national, European, that you need all kind of actors to correct each other and to tell the story, and to and that corporates also have to tell national or states that they expect them to be transparent and not corrupt and respect human rights. And otherwise it's also affecting, because we have now in the Netherlands, for example, court cases against Shell of the widows of things happening in Nigeria in the 90s, because the state of Nigeria was allowing or were pressed by Shell to give the rights of oil production to, well, etc. But it was in specific areas, and well, this was an interconnection of where it went wrong. So we have corporate interests not claiming to the state level that they should be transparent and do it in a proper way. And in the end, people were killed. And interesting is that human rights are now used to reflect on this kind of business doing in the 90s, but still going on. And that law and business and state have to do it together. This is also what you find, I think is very interesting, is much more basic on the work floor. Healthy working conditions is a kind of human right, guaranteeing freedom of association, ensuring non-discrimination of personal practices, ensuring that they do not use directly on forced labor or child labor, but providing access to basic health, education, housing for workers, families, if these are not provided, and making reasonable accommodation for all employees, religious practices. So that you see here very direct inspiration from human rights on, for example, the freedom of religion, that is translated. That is also something we should expect from business. Not to take care about things like that. Human rights in the community, by preventing the forcible displacement of individuals, groups, and communities. So Shell, of course, wanted these groups to leave the place where they have been living for centuries because they wanted the oil. That should not go like that. By working to protect the economic livelihood of local communities, contribute to public debate through differential pricing. That's very interesting. The different pricing for different groups, so that the access to products could be protected. That is not an elite thing to buy a McDonald's hamburger. By fostering opportunities for girls, so you see the gender aspect is coming back in this kind of things. Decent work again, and the last one I was mentioning about using security services. They must ensure international guidelines for the use of force are respected. Yeah, what can we do? And perhaps these are the summary of things you can work on also on local level. And for me, it's also interesting to what we can do in Utrecht with this. So how to relate them, to invite to relate to the SDGs in generals, because then you have all the full spectrum of aspects that you could work on specifically where your engagement is. There is a very interesting relation from business to philanthropy and supporting all kinds of social projects in many places. I don't know how it's here. Advocacy and public policy engagement, how to work together on making better policies, and partnerships and collective action, becoming partner in public related projects. That is also have an entrepreneurial part. What shall we do?
Я знаю, що всі поспішають на п'ятничні коктейлі, тому час буквально на 3 запитання, оскільки в мене мікрофон, я дозволю собі поставити перше. Передам мікрофон вам, звичайно ж. Ганс, в мене таке питання. був момент, коли ви говорили про демонстрацію, що таке права людини, і загалом, що таке різні ідеї в цій досить широкій концепції в міських просторах. Зокрема, веселка на дорожньому переході в вас в міській раді, виставка, фотовиставка. Чи не думали, чи загалом ви залучаєте бізнес до фінансування таких проєктів, чи регуляціями, процедурами місцевого самоврядування в Утрехті дозволена такого роду співпраця?
Human rights, we don't do that till now. It's happening in SDGs, so there is a lot of. So this is an example of business financing, but in human rights, it's mainly financed by social organizations themselves, their own budgets, and a little facilitating budget from the municipality to rent the spaces to facilitate. But it's yeah, it's not. I don't know any example. It's that business finance till now in the what we call the human rights project. If you say, well, this is also a human rights project, yeah, then this is an example of. But it's not. I think in Utrecht, it will. Others will. I could tell that story, but I don't think it will be experienced by my colleagues like that. So, I don't think the answer is no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for such an insightful presentation. And I have a question of how do you monitor the progress achieved in implementation of sustainable development goals or in human rights? Like how do you monitor that they are real, they're not just something that was declared, or like which actors help you, which tools are used?
Yeah. Well, we tried to make a monitor on human rights, and we didn't manage. We were did a lot of work to have, because you have to start with an overview. What are the relevant human rights articles? And well, that was the method we tried to follow. And then you have to report on at least three things. One is there on structural things. Is there a law or a regulation that should be implemented nationally or locally in relation to what human rights law is saying? Then you should say something about the process. Is there also, for example, the easy example, everyone has the right to vote. Is there a law that everyone can vote? Then the process is a process that everyone knows are enabled to vote, and so is there a mechanism that leads to everyone could vote, although there is a law that is just theoretically there? And then the outcome indicator, are people really voting? And this three, for us it was as a city alone, because there were no other cities working on this. It was too complex. We didn't manage, have not the expertise enough, and there was also no scientific support for that. Someone say, well, we know exactly how to do this. So, and there are some examples that there are some. Was the city of Graz was having a human rights report on local level, but it's very boring, because they don't mentioning the outcome indicators. They having for all the structure and the process. So in the end, it's. But I still think when we going to have an official human rights city label, this should we should come up with something that is a kind of assessment or report on what do we want to, where we're staying, and what should we improve. On the children's rights, we are now doing a first step together with Amsterdam, but there we choose a very limited reach of children in the situation of that are not living at home, so living in institutions. So a very specific part of children, and if their rights, because we say there is a very big problematic about what they're doing with the children and the facilities and the freedom they have. So we focus on that group. That is now starting that the researchers of the city of Amsterdam, Utrecht working together. On SDGs, there are worldwide, it's big business. Every city, the Germans have big investment in the Betterment Foundation, and there's the OECD, and in the US there are a lot of institutes in Japan. So you see that there is reporting on, and most of the reports are also quite boring because they tell the story that they do all the things already. And but there is no, we also do that, but we have now we call it a dashboard. So we have and our approach is we want to stay as close as possible at the sub-goals of and the indicators at the sub-goals as defined by the UN. Because there is a lot of cities that now are creating their own interpretation of this 229 indicators. And we say, well, some are not very relevant because we have any action on delivering different policies on this that goals. And you see that this exercise is done in several times, and that you have on city level more or less 100, 110, 90 indicators that are really relevant. So what we did were we say, well, we have take this 110 indicators very serious. We make a first report on what do we know about where we're staying now. If we don't have the data, we start to work on it. So we're investing in getting data and information and stories about what is the state of art, and we try to give the information already what we know from the past to make trend analysis until now. And of course but the most interesting is do we have goals our own that are going beyond, or are an interpretation going beyond the goals of the sub-goals that were given by the 2030 agenda. And how to make it, and that is also collective action, because normally it stops here. So you have wonderful reports and monitoring. You also have a lot of marketing. So you have this New York and Helsinki. They send the voluntary report to the United Nations. So this suggests that it's the voluntary report is, well, that is not good enough. If we take it and make it a worldwide movement, it should not be voluntary. We should the national government should tell local communities, you have to report on that thing that we are collectively responsible for. So voluntary sounds nice, but it's an expression of not well organized. And the other thing is, it's just reporting is not taking the aim and the aspiration very serious. And there I can tell you there is one very interesting city, that's Bristol. Because the mayor of Bristol, they're coming from Green Capital in 2016, I think, European Green Capital, and they were very skeptical in their evaluation of Green Capital in relation to the SDGs in 2016. And they were totally happy with resilience, because that was the concept they had bottom-up created. And now, with this mayor, Mr. Rees, they created a report with a lot of local partners, and it's really amazing. They have now, inspired by the SDGs, created a timeline on 6 streams to 2050. And they say, well, the interpretation of poverty is, and you have the same problem in human rights, it's about sufficiency. So it's people should have sufficient income to survive. And that is a kind of liberal philosophy that if you should not die. And that is escaping the big problem that is not answered by human rights, that it's one of the big topic is inequality. And that is a much bigger issue of division of income all over the world. And there is no... And what they did on local levels, they see this problem, and he inspired by a new interpretation of human rights in combination with the SDGs. For example, in the line of incomes, they say in 2043, we want to have the income difference between the highest, the rich, the best income group, the best 10%, and the lowest 10% should be 50% smaller. That is our goal for 2043. And we come up with all kinds of ideas and policies that should work in our city on this goal. Well, this is, of course, the question, what will realize of this? But it's a way of thinking that is taking the goal-setting idea of the SDGs in combination with a new interpretation of human rights. So you can find it on the internet. It looks very, well, for me it's one of the best examples, because there is also this local review from Helsinki, and when I read it, it's very much inside this local policy implementation frame, and we do already the best thing in the world, and we will be the best city in the world, and telling a story by SDGs that they are the best. And it's quite boring, because when this cannot be the meaning of indicators, and that means that when the test is, and I also personally how to do that, but if you have ideas on that, how to make a report system, a monitor, and participatory tool. So of course there should be some expertise in getting all this data. You cannot ask the neighbors here to make a data set for, but if it's not an intervention in where groups and people locally connected on a specific aspiration get this input as an information tool and set a new agenda themselves, inspired by this data, information, stories about what's the situation now. And if they cannot put their own story and information extra on this, so it should be an open system of platform of knowledge about what is the situation in this place. If that does not work, it's only, well, it has at least a danger, or it is not used, or it's a bureaucratic thing or a marketing tool to tell, well, we did a voluntary report. So it's, I don't know what you think about, but you're more expert than me on this.
Чи є ще питання?
Actually have a question on that, so, and probably that could be a part of solution. So I do believe, at least in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine, this could be a part of solution. So ranking. Do you have any rankings of the, let's say, of the business entities that they are like more sustainable or more SDG or more human rights? So do you have like an example of something like that? Because usually when at least businesses, when they compete with each other, even in being more human rights oriented, it usually can work.
No, it's not. As far as I know, it's not there. But what was interesting is that PricewaterhouseCoopers started to work on this, and they work a lot with the 500 big companies worldwide, and they did an assessment, and they found out that 70% of this big business is doing their annual report on SDGs, at least a little bit. And their theory is that it's a trend. Although, of course, Coca-Cola is reporting on only one, clean water. That is a little bit narrow, but they see that there is a huge tendency, at least at the bigger companies that can do this and have the expertise, that they work on it. And they see for themselves a huge market in all kind of other companies and also public organizations to offer their experience. Until now, I've seen their reports and they don't mentioning competition on this. And I think that also when you talk about human rights, we have a system of awards. So we're giving for example, in this globe, we have every year 5 global goals awards. So there is a team of people from business and NGOs together, and they awarding 5 new initiatives in the city of the last year, and they put them in the sunlight, in the spotlight. And they are asked, do you want to be in the spotlight? Because we're asking you to tell your business story by the words and the narrative of the SDGs. Can you, this is not only that we tell a good story about you, but we're also asking you to tell a story about the common umbrella. Do you want that? Otherwise you cannot win the award. There is also an award for municipalities. So the Dutch Association of Municipalities giving an annual award to 1 or 2 cities. So there are much more cities working on SDGs. So we have now, I think, human rights are only 3. But SDGs we now have 50. And we have 400 municipalities. So it's at least, well, 15% are explicitly working on this kind of things. But it's much more than human rights. So it's easier because it's less illegal. It's much more this policy implementation frame that is they can catch if they are not too much self-confident. But we already have a wonderful strategy, because when that is the director of urban planning is thinking, well, what is this kind of nonsense? Because I have created this bottom up myself, and I'm important. Then this has something that could be experienced as top-down. And in the Netherlands we have a process of decentralization, that some policies are given, the responsibility is given from the province to the local, or from the national government to the local. So all these people working for example, on youth policies and care are now responsible on local level since 3 years. And they are in the narrative of, yeah, but we just started. So we are responsible, we know the best. And now you're coming not with a national frame, but with an international quality standard that we have to report to. What that is, the world in the turnaround. So there is resistance in process of decentralization to, yeah.
Дякую. Дякую, Гансе, що приїхали. Дякую за лекцію. Сподіваюсь, вам Hope you liked Lviv. Сподіваюсь, вам сподобався Львів, і сподіваюсь, що вже за 1,5 року ми будемо Львів, Utrecht разом в одній мережі на справ людини. Ще раз дякую, що завітали до Львова. Дякую вам, що залишались цього вечора з нами. В циклі Львів, стаючи містом прав людини, ми побачимось вже в січні. Сподіваємося, що привеземо когось до вас з Відня або Барселони, але ви обов'язково слідкуйте за соцмережами Освітнього центру з прав людини у Львові. Ми тепер маємо інстаграм-сторінку та ютуб-канал. Підписуйтесь, ставте лайки, дзвіночки. Я думаю, що навіть в грудні ми зустрінемося і з вами гарно проведемо час. Дякую. Гарних вихідних!